Do you recognize this, folks? If you don't, this is Way of the Warrior. It's a 3DO fighting game made by the world famous Naughty Dog back in 1994. Now you might be wondering, why have I got this? Well, because once upon a time, I had a 3DO and I really loved it. No, I didn't get it when it was launched, and no, I didn't have it for very long. I had it back a couple of years ago, back in 2021. I had an FC10 model like the one you see in this picture, and I really enjoyed it. The only reason I got rid of it was because unfortunately I just couldn't support the system that well, and I needed the money at the time, hard times and all that. And I knew that the 3DO was going to cost a lot of money. It was in its box, it was complete, it had everything, and I had several games for it. But truthfully, I really want a 3DO again. I really do. I actually did like that 3DO. I definitely want one back one day. So let's talk about it. Hello and welcome back. Yes, once upon a time, Naughty Dog didn't always make the great classic games that we know today. We know them for Uncharted, Crash Bandicoot, The Last of Us, but of course even Jak and Daxter. However, Way of the Warrior, one of their first titles, I think, and the fact that it was this fighting game, as you can see here, it was just this Mortal Kombat ripoff. Yeah, most companies who make a game of that quality don't last very long, but Naughty Dog were able to buck the trend and make some of the greatest games we've seen on Sony's platforms. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about my 3DO experience. Why did I buy one? What games did I have? And why did I get rid of it in the end? So first off, the 3DO. We all know the story. It was a high-tech machine made back in 1993 by Trip Hawkins and the 3DO company. It was technically advanced for its time, and it had the best 3D graphics ever seen for a console at that particular time. It cost a lot of money in the United States, $699 at launch, and that was the FC1 model, although my FC10 model that I used to have was a cheaper option that came out a year later. Eventually, the company sold 2 million copies, or 2 million consoles should I say, and unfortunately it wasn't enough. The price was too high, consumer interest was low, not enough games sold, the game quality was questionable, and the library of games was, well, let's just say they were interesting, to put it mildly. But still, the 3DO had some great games. It had some good things going for it during 1993 to 1996 when it was released and then discontinued. And today, it's a collector's item. But unlike, say, PlayStation, where everyone loves it, 3DO is just restricted to a select few that experienced it, and unfortunately 3DO prices are fairly expensive, the games aren't so bad, at least for now, and support for 3DO is fairly limited. Of course you got 4DO, the emulator, so that's your best chance if you want to play some 3DO games. Of course, not only that, but the 3DO company would go on to make other games for other platforms for about 7 years. The most successful games are the Army Air series of games where you had toy soldiers doing missions and things, but even that wasn't enough, and the company was defunct by 2003. Why did I get 3DO? Well, back in 2015 I was watching videos about 3DO, and a lot of the games that they showed off, like Super Street Fighter 2 and Total Eclipse, even Gex, they were very interesting to me, even though I had heard about these games on other platforms. But something about 3DO just caught my attention. I loved the premium of the console, because the console did look very nice. Even the FC10 model was still quite a nice system, even though it was top loader. And I also just loved the history, how this company could have been the next PlayStation had they not made a mistake and sold the units at $6.99 and focused more on games. But hindsight is a nightmare, right? And also, I just loved some of the features it had. It could play video CDs, the controllers were like VCR control devices, and I loved how the original legit 3DO controllers by Panasonic had a headphone jack, much like how the Sega Mega Drive has one on the Model 1. Only these units, and I promise you this much, because I've had them, the headphone jack on these controllers are amazing. There's a little knob at the bottom where you can turn it up, and it was so powerful that my old Sennheiser headphones were actually listenable using the controller's headphone port. That's how powerful these controllers were. And let me tell you, I've got a DualSense controller, the PlayStation 5 controller that also has a headphone jack. And I'm sorry, that is a kipper compared to the 3DO controller's headphone jack, because it's quiet in comparison. I know the DualSense has the what's it called, the 3D audio that Sony showed off, but that's got nothing compared to that 3DO controller. It was absolutely fantastic, and I wish for that alone I could have another 3DO. Besides the amazing controller and the system itself and how well it was built, why else do I want a 3DO? Because the games they had on the platform, at least some of them, were quite unique. You still got one of the best ports of Street Fighter 2. You had some great Neo Geo ports. There were some nice platformers. A lot of 3D games started to actually work on 3DO, even though there's questions about how the 3D was actually achieved and whether it was 3D or not. And some of the best ports of certain games are on 3DO, like Starfighter. Starfighter 3000 wasn't so good on PlayStation or Sega Saturn, and I should know, I had both ports. But the 3DO version, wow. And of course you had your, point and click adventure games that were on 3DO. They were popular back at the time. And again, video CDs. Now look, I did not grow up with video CDs at all. We had VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, that was it. And of course you had video recorders, stuff like that. But the 3DO was actually one of the first video CD players that was actually quite good, despite the price. Oh, and the audio on the 3DO. When it comes to just putting in your music CDs and playing them, it is one of the best CD players I've ever had, ever. And even though I love my PlayStation 2 and other systems that can play video and audio CDs, the 3DO was one of the best ones I've ever had. And considering that I got an FZ10 boxed for about £200 when I bought it back in 2021, that to me is an insane deal. It was a lovely system. And don't forget, the 3DO has no copy protection either, so if I wanted to, I could burn games to a disc. Although I've seen that the process for that is cumbersome, complicated, frustrating, and it doesn't seem to work very well. You have to get specific discs at specific speeds, and even then you have to find good, very good CDs to use, because most of the CDs that I could use to burn and write to, which are very cheap, are of poor quality, and the ones that are good cost a lot of money. So unless you're serious about doing things like that with 3DO, not really worth it. Probably best just to get the real games. And this is the other problem with 3DO as well. There's just no community support for it. Yes, we have 4DO, the emulator, and like I said, if you want to experience 3DO games like Way of the Warrior here, which I mean, it's probably the best way to experience it, let's be honest with you, it's the only real way, besides getting the real hardware, that you can experience 3DO games today. There's just no easy way to play them outside of emulation. There's no SD card mods, there's no modifications for getting cartridges, because of course the 3DO does not take cartridges. The 3DO is just the console that has been left behind, and it's sad because that system did have good potential, and I like it. I like the 3DO. I mean, it's better than the Atari Jaguar. Sorry to Atari Jaguar fans. I know the console's great and homebrew for it is amazing, and support for the Atari Jaguar is increasing dramatically nowadays, but I feel that 3DO was a better system. It had more potential. It had a longer lifespan, even though they both lasted the same amount of time, just 3 years from 1993 when I was born. That's why it's so special. I'm kidding. But also because it just had a bigger library of better games that actually took advantage of the hardware at the time. It was a great system. There is one other issue about the 3DO though. And this is why it needs modding as well. It only took S-Video maximum, which is a good cable, and it also outputted in 480i or 576i for power region games. Now you might think, oh, the 3DO was ahead of its time then, it used interlaced outputs, and you think, yeah, but no, the problem is most of the games were made with 2D or 240p or 288p in mind, so just making them interlaced just makes it more frustrating to play, because interlacing, as we all know, is a nightmare when it comes to deinterlacing and figuring out what the best way to deinterlace is. But of course, there are videos out there that show you what happens if you modify the 3DO to RGB SCAR, and if you get a special Japanese version, they do have a switcher for 240p or 480i output. And if you watch My Life in Gaming on that, you'll see that a lot of the results show that the 240p upscaled with RGB is so much better than trying to use the standard 480i output, although some games do work best with 480i because they were made with that in mind for the 3DO, and any attempts to adjust it to 240p just messes up the video or makes the gameplay too quick or something. So it's not a flawless mod. However, I wish this was something that was more widespread in the 3DO community. However, as I said before, my reasons for owning a 3DO is I just like owning strange and failed consoles that actually are better than what the public led on to be. Yes, the 3DO company messed up in how they marketed the system, and it was too pricey for gamers good. I mean, no one was going to buy a console for $699. It just was never going to happen in 1993, and of course the lack of games at launch didn't help the 3DO company out when it came to their systems. And then once they did start to make cheaper systems, the companies then realized that the money had to be made with software, and because 3DO software didn't sell that much, you know, they realized that the game quality was the biggest draw for gamers, and it was just far too late by then. But you folks let me know, what do you think of the 3DO? Have you ever used one? Have you ever played one? Did you ever own one back in 1993 or 1996 or whenever it was out during its lifespan? And would you play 3DO games even if that means using emulation? Let me know, and I'll see you next time.